On a warm Saturday morning in June of 1988, at an estate auction in Washtenaw County, Michigan, a man named Robert Nash made what the dealer called the most pointless purchase of the day. He paid $695 for a 1946 Chevrolet COE that looked like it had been parked underwater for a decade. The truck sat at the edge of the auction lot, its blue paint oxidized to a chalky gray-white. The chrome was pitted with rust. The wooden stake bed had rotted through in 3 places. Someone had spray-painted "Rust Bucket" across the driver's door, and nobody had bothered to argue. The auctioneer clearly wanted to move on. Last item, folks. 1946 Chevrolet cab-over engine. Sold as is. Good for parts, maybe restoration if you're ambitious. Do I hear $400? Silence. $300. Nothing. $200, and we call it a day. Robert Nash raised his hand. $695. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, I said 200. I heard you. $695. The crowd turned to stare. A few men laughed. Who bids 3 times what nobody else would offer? The dealer, a man named Phil Henderson who sold used trucks from a lot in Ann Arbor, shook his head loudly enough for people to hear. That's a rust bucket on wheels, friend. You're throwing money away. Robert walked to the payment table, counted out 6 $100 bills and $95 in smaller bills, and took his receipt without looking back. Let me tell you about Robert Nash, because understanding him explains everything that followed. Robert was 54 years old in 1988, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. They'd never had children. For 30 years, Robert had worked as a postal carrier in Ann Arbor, walking the same routes, delivering mail to the same houses, watching families grow while his remained just the 2 of them. When Margaret died in 1985, Robert retired early. He used his savings to start a small business, antique delivery services. He'd pick up furniture, estate items, vintage goods, and deliver them for dealers and collectors. It wasn't about the money. It was about having a reason to get up in the morning. He needed a truck, something with character, something that looked like it belonged to a different era because that's what he was hauling. The 1946 Chevrolet COE was perfect. Cab-over engine design, the driver sitting above the front axle, the hood opening forward. Classic lines from the year after the war ended. Robert saw past the rust. He saw what it could be. What he didn't see was what it carried. What had been hidden inside it for 47 years. What would change 2 lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. But that discovery was 14 years away. First, Robert had to restore the truck. Let me tell you about those restoration years, because they mattered. Robert spent 2 years bringing the Chevrolet back. He stripped the body to bare metal, repaired the rust, repainted it in period-correct Chevrolet blue. He rebuilt the stake bed with new oak planking. He went through the inline-6 engine, the manual transmission, the brake system. By 1990, the truck ran like it was 1946 again. Robert used it for his delivery business. He'd show up at estate sales and antique shops in that blue Chevrolet and people would smile. It looked right. It felt right, like time travel on wheels. The truck became known around Ann Arbor. Collectors would call Robert specifically because they wanted their antiques delivered in something that matched their era. A Victorian dresser in a 1946 truck felt more authentic than the same dresser in a modern van. Robert drove that truck for 12 years, thousands of miles, hundreds of deliveries. He maintained it carefully, checked everything regularly, treated it the way you treat something you respect. But he never reupholstered the driver's seat. The original bench seat was cracked and worn, but it was still functional. Robert figured he'd get to it eventually. There was no rush. Until the spring of 2002, when the seat finally gave out. Robert was making a delivery in Ypsilanti when he felt the seat frame crack beneath him. Something in the support structure had finally surrendered to age. The seat was now dangerous. The frame could collapse completely. Robert drove home carefully and decided it was time. He'd rebuild the seat properly, strip it down to the frame, replace the springs, add new padding, reupholster it in period-correct vinyl. He started the work on a Saturday morning in May. He removed the seat from the cab and carried it into his garage workshop. He began carefully removing the old upholstery, peeling back layers of cracked vinyl and dried foam padding. That's when he found the box. It was wedged inside the seat frame itself, wrapped in oilcloth that had turned dark with age. Someone had deliberately hidden it there, sealed it, concealed it where nobody would find it unless they completely dismantled the seat. Robert's hands were shaking when he unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a metal box, not large, about the size of a cigar box, sealed with tape that had long since dried and cracked. Robert opened it. Inside were items that made no immediate sense. 2 tiny hospital bracelets, the kind they put on newborns, yellowed papers, a photograph, a letter. Robert sat down on his workshop stool and began reading. The hospital bracelets were dated March 15, 1941. Infant identification bands from St. Joseph Mercy Hospital in Ann Arbor. One said Baby Girl Sullivan A, the other said Baby Girl Sullivan B. The birth certificates were underneath. Twin girls, Mary Sullivan and Margaret Sullivan. Born March 15, 1941, to Eleanor Marie Sullivan, age 19, unmarried. Then Robert found the adoption papers, only one set, for Margaret Sullivan only, signed by Eleanor Sullivan, dated March 17, 1941, 2 days after the birth. And finally the letter, handwritten on lined paper. The ink had faded but was still readable. Robert read it twice, then a third time, not believing what he was seeing. The letter was dated March 16, 1941, 1 day after the twins were born. It read, "To whoever finds this, I am Eleanor Sullivan. Yesterday I gave birth to twin daughters, Mary and Margaret. They are beautiful and perfect, and I love them more than I can write. But I cannot keep them both. I am 19 years old. I am not married. The father is gone. I work at the shirt factory and make $14 a week. I can barely feed myself. I am keeping Mary. I am giving Margaret to the adoption agency tomorrow. They say she will go to a good family. They say I should forget about her and move on. But I cannot forget, so I am hiding this: Margaret's birth certificate, her adoption papers, her hospital bracelet, and Mary's bracelet, so whoever finds this will know they were together. Someday maybe someone will find this box. Maybe Mary will find it. Maybe Margaret will find it. Maybe they will find each other. I pray they forgive me. I pray they understand. I could not keep both. But I could not let them both disappear. God forgive me. Eleanor Marie Sullivan. March 16, 1941. Robert sat in his garage, holding a letter written 61 years earlier by a teenage mother who'd made an impossible choice. Twin girls separated at birth, one kept, one adopted, neither knowing the other existed. And hidden in a truck seat, the only evidence that they'd ever been together. Robert made a decision that changed everything. He called the hospital first. St. Joseph Mercy had records going back to 1941, but they needed legal authorization to release them. Robert explained what he'd found. The hospital records department was skeptical but agreed to verify the birth certificates. They were authentic, twin girls, born March 15, 1941, Mary and Margaret Sullivan. Then Robert called a lawyer who specialized in adoption searches. The lawyer explained that Michigan adoption records from the 1940s were sealed, but there were legal processes for opening them in cases of medical necessity or humanitarian interest. This qualifies as humanitarian, the lawyer said. Let me see what I can do. It took 4 months. In September of 2002, Robert received 2 phone calls that made him sit down and cry. The first call was from the lawyer. I found Mary Sullivan. She's alive. She's married. Her name is Mary Morrison now. She lives in Columbus, Ohio. She's 61 years old, and she has no idea she's a twin. The second call came 3 days later. I found Margaret. The adoption records were sealed, but the court agreed to open them. Her adoptive name was Margaret Davis. She's alive. She lives in Portland, Oregon. She's 61 years old, and she doesn't know about Mary either. Robert asked the question that terrified him. Do they want to know? I haven't told them yet, the lawyer said. I wanted to ask you first. You found this. It's your decision whether to proceed. Robert didn't hesitate. Tell them, they deserve to know. The lawyer called Mary Morrison first. Mary was 61 years old, a retired elementary school teacher living in a quiet suburb of Columbus. She'd been married for 38 years to a man named Thomas who died 3 years earlier of a heart attack. She had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and 5 grandchildren. When the lawyer called and said, I'm calling about your birth family, Mary's first response was confusion. I know my birth family, she said. My mother was Eleanor Sullivan. She died when I was 2 years old. I was raised by my aunt. Mrs. Morrison, the lawyer said gently, did your mother ever tell you that you were a twin? Silence on the phone. Then what? The lawyer explained. The truck, the box, the letter, the birth certificates. The sister named Margaret who'd been given up for adoption 2 days after they were born. Mary sat down. She couldn't speak. When she finally found words, all she said was, I have a sister. The lawyer called Margaret Davis the same day. Margaret was 61 years old, a retired elementary school teacher living in Portland. She'd been married for 36 years to a man named William who died 2 years earlier of cancer. She had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and 4 grandchildren. Margaret had known she was adopted her whole life. Her adoptive parents had told her when she was young. She'd always wondered about her birth mother but had never searched. The records were sealed, and she'd convinced herself it didn't matter. When the lawyer called and said, I have information about your birth family, Margaret's heart started racing. My birth mother, she asked. Yes, the lawyer said, and your twin sister. Margaret dropped the phone. The lawyer arranged the meeting for October 15, 2002, at Detroit Metropolitan Airport, neutral ground, halfway between Columbus and Portland. Robert Nash was invited. The twins wanted to meet the man who'd found what their mother had hidden 61 years earlier. Let me tell you about that day, because everyone who was there says they'll never forget it. Mary Morrison flew in from Columbus. Margaret Davis flew in from Portland. They'd both seen photographs of each other that the lawyer had sent. They knew they were identical twins, but seeing photographs and seeing a person are different things. Robert was waiting at the arrivals area with the lawyer. He was holding the metal box, the one he'd found in the truck seat, the one that held their story. Mary arrived first. She came through security, a 61-year-old woman with gray hair and bright eyes, looking around nervously. Then Margaret appeared, coming from a different concourse, walking toward the meeting point. They saw each other at the same moment. And they both stopped walking. They stood there, 50 feet apart, staring at mirror images of themselves. Same height, same build, same gray hair in the same style, same way of standing, same expression of shock and wonder. They moved toward each other slowly, then faster. Then they were hugging and crying and holding each other like they were afraid the other would disappear. The first words they spoke were identical, at the exact same time, in the exact same tone. I always felt incomplete. Then they both laughed through their tears, because they'd even said it simultaneously. Robert stood back and watched. The lawyer was crying. Other people in the airport had stopped to watch, sensing something profound was happening. Mary and Margaret held each other for 5 full minutes without letting go. When they finally separated, Mary turned to Robert. "You're Mr. Nash." "Yes, ma'am." "You found us." "I found what your mother left. She found you." Margaret walked over and took Robert's hands. "Thank you. Thank you for not throwing it away. Thank you for searching. Thank you for caring about 2 people you'd never met." "I couldn't throw it away," Robert said. "Your mother hid it for a reason." They sat in the airport restaurant for 4 hours. Mary and Margaret talked. They compared their lives. Both had married at age 23. Both to men named Thomas or William. Both marriages had lasted over 35 years. Both had been widowed in their late 50s, 2 years apart. Both had 3 children. Both had 2 daughters and 1 son, same order. Both had taught elementary school, 3rd grade. Both had retired at age 59. Both lived alone with cats. Both had the same recurring dream about someone who looked like them but wasn't them. They'd lived separate lives on opposite sides of the country, never knowing the other existed. But their lives had followed nearly identical patterns. "It's like we were living the same life in 2 places," Mary said. Margaret nodded. "I always felt like half of something. I just never knew what the other half was." Before they left the airport, Robert gave them the box, everything that had been hidden in the truck seat, the bracelets, the birth certificates, the adoption papers. Eleanor's letter. Mary read the letter aloud. Both women cried. "She wanted us to find each other," Margaret said. "It took 61 years," Mary answered, "but we did. Let me tell you about the next 17 years, because that's where the real story lives." Margaret moved from Portland to Columbus 6 months after the reunion. She bought a house 3 blocks from Mary. For the first time since birth, they lived near each other. They were inseparable. They had lunch together every day. They took trips together. They celebrated holidays together. They became part of each other's families. Their children, who'd grown up as only children or with siblings, suddenly had cousins they'd never known about. The families merged. Reunions became massive gatherings. Mary and Margaret were studied by the University of Minnesota Twin Studies program. Their case was remarkable. Identical twins separated at 1 day old, raised in different states by different families, living parallel lives without contact. The researchers found that despite being separated for 61 years, Mary and Margaret had the same IQ score within 2 points, the same food preferences, the same morning routines, the same political views, the same religious beliefs, even the same handwriting. "It's one of the most striking cases of genetic influence we've ever documented," the lead researcher said. But Mary and Margaret didn't care about the science. They cared about the time they'd lost and the time they'd found. 61 years we lived without each other," Mary said in an interview. 17 years we've lived together. Those 17 years are worth all 61. Robert Nash remained close to both of them. They invited him to everything: birthdays, holidays, family gatherings. They called him the man who gave us each other. In 2015, Robert was diagnosed with cancer. Mary and Margaret took turns visiting him, bringing meals, sitting with him during treatments. Robert died in January of 2016, age 81. His funeral was held in Ann Arbor. Mary and Margaret sat in the front row. Mary spoke at the service. Robert Nash was a mailman for 30 years. He delivered letters to strangers, but the most important delivery he ever made was delivering 2 sisters to each other. He found what our mother hid. He didn't have to search for us. He didn't have to care, but he did. And because of that, I got to know my sister. I got to be whole. Margaret added, "In our mother's letter, she wrote, maybe they will find each other." "We did, Mom. We found each other. Thank you, Mr. Nash, for making sure we did. The 1946 Chevrolet COE was donated to the Michigan History Museum. It sits in a permanent exhibit about adoption, family, and the objects that carry secrets. Next to the truck is a display case containing the metal box, the hospital bracelets, the birth certificates, and Eleanor Sullivan's letter. The placard reads, "The seat that held two lives together, how a 1946 truck reunited twins separated 67 years." Mary Morrison died in August of 2018, age 77, of heart failure. Margaret was with her. They were holding hands. Margaret spoke at the funeral. 61 years I lived without knowing half of me existed. 16 years I lived knowing I was whole. Those 16 years were the best years of my life. See you soon, sister. Margaret Davis died in September of 2019, age 78, 14 months after Mary. The family said she'd been declining since Mary's death, as if part of her had left when her twin did. They were buried side by side in Columbus. The headstone reads, Mary Sullivan Morrison and Margaret Sullivan Davis. Born together, March 15, 1941. Separated, March 17, 1941. Reunited, October 15, 2002. Together forever, 2019. At the base of the headstone, the family placed a small metal replica of the box Robert had found. Engraved on it are Eleanor Sullivan's words. Maybe they will find each other. Let me end this story where it began, at an auction where a man bought a truck everyone called a rust bucket. Robert Nash paid $695 for a 1946 Chevrolet that the dealer mocked. He restored it. He drove it. He used it to build a small business delivering antiques to people who cared about the past. He never expected to deliver the most important thing he'd ever carry. Hidden in that truck seat was a mother's desperate hope, twin daughters separated by poverty, a letter that waited 61 years to be found, two lives that ran parallel without knowing the other existed. Robert found it. He could have thrown it away. He could have kept it as a curiosity. He could have done nothing. Instead, he searched. He cared. He reunited two sisters who'd been separated since they were 1 day old. The dealer called it a rust bucket, but that truck carried something more valuable than anyone knew. It carried two lives waiting to be reunited. It carried a mother's prayer across 6 decades. It carried hope sealed in a metal box until the right person found it. Mary and Margaret got 16 years together. 16 years of sister lunches and shared holidays and finally feeling complete. 16 years that never would have happened if Robert Nash had walked past that truck at the auction. Sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in the places everyone else calls worthless. Sometimes a man with a kind heart and a willingness to search can change lives he's never met. And sometimes, 61 years after a teenage mother makes an impossible choice, her prayer gets answered in the front seat of a truck nobody wanted. The dealer laughed at a rust bucket. The rust bucket held two sisters. And the man who believed in old things gave them back to each other.